You're done here. The words landed before I could even pull out my chair. Paul Whitman slid the termination letter across the glass table like it was nothing, just another piece of paper on another Tuesday morning. Through the conference room windows, I could see my coworkers pretending not to watch. But they were watching. Everyone was watching. This project failed, Paul said, his finger tapping the document. Someone has to take responsibility. My throat tightened. I pressed my hands flat against my legs so nobody would see them shaking. You approved every single change I recommended, I said quietly. Every deadline extension I requested. You said no to all of them. Paul's smile didn't touch his eyes. Never did. Security will escort you out in 10 minutes. HR has your final check. The air felt thick, heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. As I stood up, my legs barely steady, one thought crashed through my mind louder than everything else. He wasn't just firing me. He was making sure everyone believed this was my fault. He was erasing 2 years of my work in a single morning, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I didn't cry in front of them. People always say that when they tell these stories like it's some kind of victory. But the truth is harder than that. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip that glass table and make Paul explain himself in front of everyone. Instead I walked past the cubicles, past the break room where I'd made coffee an hour ago, past coworkers who suddenly found their computer screens incredibly interesting. I carried my cardboard box, my notebook, my stupid motivational mug, the desk plant I'd kept alive for 18 months, and felt invisible. Paul stayed in the conference room, still sitting, still watching. I could feel his eyes on my back with every step. The security guard, Marcus, walked beside me without speaking. He'd always been kind. Today he looked at the floor. When the elevator doors finally closed, sealing me inside that small metal box, my reflection stared back at me from the polished walls. I looked exactly the same as I had that morning. But everything had changed. And one question kept hammering against my skull. What just happened to me? My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 34 years old. I fix broken systems for a living, or at least I used to. Companies hire people like me when their processes fall apart, when their projects go sideways, when nobody else can figure out why nothing works anymore. I'm a systems strategist, problem solver, the person who sees patterns nobody else notices. And until this morning, I genuinely believed that doing good work protected you. That if you were smart enough, careful enough, thorough enough, people would see your value. That competence mattered more than politics. I was wrong about all of it. Paul Whitman taught me that lesson in the cruelest way possible. He didn't just fire me. He destroyed my reputation while doing it. He made sure that when people heard my name, they'd think of failure. And the worst part, I'd seen it coming. Not the firing itself, I wasn't that smart. But the way Paul handled pressure, the way he made decisions, the way he smiled when things went wrong. I'd known something was off. I just didn't know it would end with me holding a cardboard box. The project didn't fail. Paul did. Let me be clear about that. The Kingston system, that's what we called it, was supposed to streamline data processing for our biggest client. 3 departments, 5 teams, hundreds of moving parts that needed to work together perfectly. I warned Paul from the beginning. The timeline was impossible. 6 months for something that needed 12. I sent him emails, detailed professional emails, explaining why we needed more time. I showed him the risks. I built spreadsheets demonstrating what would happen if we rushed. He wanted speed. He wanted to look like a miracle worker. He wanted the promotion that came with delivering ahead of schedule. We'll make it work, he'd said, that same empty smile on his face. That's what great teams do. They find solutions. So I found solutions. I worked weekends. I stayed until midnight testing systems. I caught problems before they became disasters. But Paul kept cutting corners I told him we couldn't cut. He ignored warnings I said we couldn't ignore. And when the system finally crashed during the client demonstration, exactly like I'd predicted, he needed someone to blame. The silence started immediately. By Monday morning my inbox felt wrong. Too empty. Too quiet. A recruiter who'd been emailing me about opportunities suddenly stopped responding. A coffee meeting with an industry contact got cancelled with no explanation. Someone I'd considered a friend from my old job stopped liking my LinkedIn posts. First, I thought I was being paranoid. Then I started hearing things. Through a former colleague who still talked to me. Paul's been telling people you went rogue. That you ignored his guidance and pushed untested systems. Through another connection. He said you were difficult to work with. That you couldn't handle pressure. Through someone who barely knew me. I heard the whole thing was your design. That you convinced everyone it would work. And then it didn't. Paul wasn't just firing me. He was making sure I stayed fired. He was poisoning every well I might drink from. Closing every door I might walk through. He was systematically destroying my career. And he was doing it with the same calm efficiency he'd used to slide that termination letter across the table. And there was nothing I could do about it. I sold my car in July. It wasn't dramatic. I just needed the money. My savings were disappearing faster than I'd expected. Rent, groceries, health insurance I had to pay for myself now. Everything added up differently when you didn't have a paycheck. I canceled my gym membership. I stopped meeting friends for drinks. I learned to make coffee at home instead of buying it. At night, I'd lie in bed and replay that meeting. Paul's voice so steady and sure. My own voice, trying to sound professional when everything inside me was screaming. The way nobody defended me. The way everyone just watched it happen. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. Right then I was grieving. Grieving the career I'd built. The reputation I'd earned. The future I thought I had. People don't tell you that getting fired feels like a death. But it does. Part of you dies in that conference room. And you spend weeks afterward trying to figure out who you are without the thing that defined you. I spent a lot of time staring at my ceiling. A lot of time wondering if Paul was right. If maybe I really had messed up somehow. The email came at 2:14 in the morning. I was awake. I was always awake by then. Scrolling through job boards that all required experience I suddenly couldn't prove I had. The sender was Vincent Torres. I'd worked with him 3 years ago on a smaller project. Good guy. Smart. Respected in the industry. The message was short. Heard what happened with Kingston. Doesn't add up. I know your work. If you're open to contract work, call me. I stared at those words for a long time. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to delete it. To pretend I hadn't seen it. Because acknowledging it meant admitting I needed help. And I wasn't ready for that yet. But another part of me, the part that had gotten up every morning despite everything, knew this might be the only rope someone threw me. Took a breath. And I replied, I'm interested. When can we talk? I hit send before I could change my mind. Then I sat there in the dark, watching the screen, wondering if I just grabbed onto something real or if I was fooling myself again. My phone rang 6 hours later. It was Vincent. And he was offering me a chance. I didn't chase my old title. Couldn't. Paul had made sure of that. So I worked quietly instead. Small contracts. Short-term projects. The kind of work that didn't come with business cards or LinkedIn updates. Vincent introduced me to people who needed problems solved but didn't care about corporate drama. A manufacturing company with inventory issues. A non-profit with database chaos. A startup that couldn't figure out why their system kept crashing. Fixed them. One at a time. No spotlight. No announcements. But something changed in how I worked. Before Paul, I'd trusted people's judgment. I'd assumed that if someone had authority, they probably knew what they were doing. I'd believed that following the rules and doing good work was enough. Now I documented everything. I asked harder questions. I pushed back when something felt wrong, even if it made people uncomfortable. I took the Kingston system, Paul's failed project, my destroyed reputation, and I rebuilt it. Not emotionally. Methodically. I identified every mistake, every shortcut, every ignored warning. I figured out what should have been done differently. Not for Paul. For me. Because I needed to know I'd been right. And I needed to be ready if I ever got another chance. 6 months after the firing, something shifted. People started asking questions. Not about why I got fired. Paul's story had stuck too well for that. But about my results. The manufacturing company's inventory system was running smoothly. They'd cut processing time by 40%. The non-profits database was actually usable now. The startup hadn't crashed in 3 months. Word travels in small industries. Someone mentioned my name at a conference. Another person asked for an introduction. A third wanted to know if I was available for consulting. My name was coming back. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just carefully, like a plant growing through concrete. I still couldn't get interviews at major firms. Paul's version of events had done too much damage there. But the people who actually worked with me, who saw what I could do instead of just hearing what Paul said, they started trusting me again. I raised my rates. Started being selective about projects. Built a small reputation in the corners of the industry Paul didn't control. And I kept refining that Kingston system design. Making it better. Making it bulletproof. Preparing for an opportunity one wasn't sure would ever come. 2 years passed. I didn't track Paul during that time. I didn't need to. His name kept appearing in my LinkedIn feed, in industry newsletters, in the background of conversations. He got promoted 6 months after firing me. Director of Strategic Systems. Bigger title. Bigger salary. The reward for handling a difficult situation with professionalism. I saw him speak at a conference once. From the back of the room, where he couldn't see me, he talked about leadership and accountability. About making tough decisions. About the importance of building strong teams. People applauded. I left before the Q&A. But I noticed something during those 2 years. Paul's projects kept having problems. Not failures exactly, he was too careful for that now, but consistent issues. Delays. Budget overruns. Teams that seemed to cycle through members quickly. The same patterns I'd seen with Kingston. The same mistakes. The same refusal to listen when people warned him. He was still Paul. Still cutting corners. Still choosing speed over substance. Still believing his confidence could replace competence. And I knew eventually it would catch up to him. It always does. The only question was when. The press release dropped on a Tuesday morning. I was working from my apartment, my new normal, when the notification appeared. TechFlow Systems announces major initiative. Kingston 2.0. My coffee went cold in my hand. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Paul's company was relaunching the Kingston system. The same project. The same promises. They called it reimagined. They called it improved. They called it visionary leadership, bringing innovation to data processing. Paul's face was in the announcement photo. That same smile. The article quoted him. We learned valuable lessons from our initial approach. Kingston 2.0 represents the next evolution of what we always knew was possible. My hands weren't shaking this time. My throat wasn't tight. Something else was happening. Something calm and clear and absolutely certain. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the refined Kingston system design I'd been perfecting for 2 years. Every problem solved. Every shortcut eliminated. Every warning addressed. Then I started making phone calls. Not to Paul. Not to TechFlow. To the people who'd hired me over the past 2 years. To the contacts I'd built. To the industry connections who remembered my work instead of Paul's story. I had something to offer. And this time I knew exactly what it was worth. The call came 3 days later. Harrison and Cole. Paul's biggest competitor. They'd been fighting for the same clients, the same contracts, the same market share for 5 years. We saw the Kingston 2.0 announcement, the voice on the phone said. It was Amanda Harrison herself. Yo. We've been trying to develop something similar for 18 months. Not going well. I paused. Waited. Your name came up. We did some digging. Found out you were the original architect on Kingston before it went sideways. Found out you've been doing interesting work since then. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed level. I'm listening. We need help executing a complex data integration system. Multiple departments. Tight timeline. High stakes. When I describe the technical requirements, you'll probably recognize them. She laid out the project. I did recognize them. It was Kingston. The same core challenge. The same fundamental problem that needed solving. The problem I'd been preparing to solve correctly for 2 years. I'd need full authority over the technical decisions, I said. No shortcuts. No politics. If something needs more time, it gets more time. Amanda didn't hesitate. Done. When can you start? I looked at my calendar. My apartment. At the life I'd rebuilt from nothing. Monday, I said. I didn't tell them about Paul. Not during the interview. Not during contract negotiations. Not when I started outlining the technical approach. Harrison and Cole knew I'd worked at TechFlow. They knew about Kingston. But I didn't make it personal. I didn't badmouth my former boss. I didn't explain what really happened. I just asked smart questions. I built a smarter plan. I showed them what worked and what didn't, based on actual experience instead of optimistic guesses. They liked what they heard. More importantly, they trusted it. They could see the difference between someone who'd thought about this problem and someone who'd lived through failing to solve it. You're different from other consultants we've interviewed, Amanda's technical director said during one early meeting. You don't oversell. You don't promise miracles. You just explain what's actually possible. That's because I've seen what happens when you promise miracles, I replied. It doesn't end well for anyone. They hired me as lead strategist. Full technical authority. Reasonable timeline. Actual budget for proper testing. Everything Paul had refused to give me. Everything that might have saved Kingston the first time. I signed the contract on a Friday afternoon. That weekend I didn't celebrate. I worked. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about getting it right. Finally, we launched in November. 16 months after I started. 4 months after Paul's Kingston 2.0 launch date. No press release. No big announcement. Just a quiet rollout to Harrison and Cole's pilot clients. The system worked. Not perfectly, nothing's perfect on day one, but it worked. Data moved smoothly between departments. Processing times dropped by 38%. The integration issues I'd predicted and prevented never appeared. Within 2 weeks, the pilot clients were asking to expand usage. Within 4 weeks, other companies were asking for demonstrations. Within 6 weeks, industry analysts were writing about Harrison and Cole's surprisingly robust new platform. Nobody mentioned my name yet. That was fine. The results spoke loudly enough. But I knew something Paul didn't. I knew that when you build something right, when you take the time to do it properly, when you listen to warnings, when you don't cut corners, the success takes care of itself. You don't need to brag. You don't need to spin stories. You just let the work speak. And it was speaking. Clear and loud. While Paul's Kingston 2.0 was about to start screaming. Paul's launch happened the first week of December. I knew the date. Everyone in the industry knew the date. TechFlow had been promoting it for months. The future of data integration. Revolutionary processing. Setting new standards. Big promises. Bigger stakes. I didn't watch the launch event. I was too busy managing our own system. Handling the steady stream of new clients. Training Harrison and Cole's team to maintain what we'd built. But I heard about it. In an industry this small, you always hear about it. The demonstration went fine. Paul gave a great presentation. The system looked impressive on the big screens. Executives applauded. Press coverage was positive. Then companies started actually using it. And the same problems appeared. The same issues I'd warned about 2 years ago. Processing delays. Integration failures. Data inconsistencies that grew worse under heavy load. The problems I'd fixed in my version. The problems Paul had ignored in his. Within 3 weeks, 2 major clients suspended their rollout. Within 5 weeks, industry forums were buzzing with complaints. Within 7 weeks, articles started appearing with titles like Kingston 2.0, Innovation or Repetition. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post anything. I didn't reach out to former colleagues to say, I told you so. I just kept working. Kept improving our system. Kept proving what competence looked like when you didn't rush it. The comparisons started in January. Industry analysts love comparing competing products. And when two systems launched within months of each other, both promising to solve the same problem, the comparisons were inevitable. Side-by-side reviews appeared in trade publications, performance benchmarks, user satisfaction surveys, technical deep dives. Harrison & Cole's system, my system, consistently outperformed Kingston 2.0, not by a little, by a lot. Faster processing, better stability, fewer errors, higher client satisfaction, lower maintenance cost. One article laid it out in brutal detail. While TechFlow's Kingston 2.0 shows ambition, Harrison & Cole's unnamed platform demonstrates the difference between promising innovation and delivering it. Another went further. Industry sources suggest Harrison & Cole's success stems from giving technical leadership actual authority over decisions, rather than rushing to meet arbitrary deadlines. They still weren't using my name. Harrison & Cole kept technical staff private. But people were starting to ask questions. Starting to dig. Starting to wonder who'd built the system that was making Paul's look broken. And in private industry channels, in the conversations that happened away from public view, my name was circulating again. Not as the person who failed at Kingston. As the person who'd actually solved it. The redemption I'd stopped hoping for was happening. Quietly. Inevitably. Built on actual results instead of empty promises. Paul resigned in February. Mutual decision. That's what the press release said. Pursuing new opportunities. The standard language companies use when someone's forced out but they want to avoid lawsuits. No apology. No acknowledgement. No explanation. Just silence. Corporate silence. The kind that says everything by saying nothing. I heard through former colleagues that the board had lost confidence. That clients were demanding answers. That investors were asking why TechFlow's revolutionary system kept having problems while their biggest competitors' quiet launch was stealing market share. Paul tried to blame his team. Tried to claim unforeseen technical challenges. Tried to spin it as learning experiences that would make the next version better. But this time people asked questions. This time they checked the history. This time they found emails Paul had sent 2 years ago, promising Kingston would work despite technical warnings. Found documentation of concerns raised and ignored. Found patterns. The same patterns showing up again in Kingston 2.0. Paul's reputation, the thing he'd built by destroying mine, finally cracked. And unlike me, he didn't have 2 years of quiet competence to fall back on. He had explanations, excuses, empty promises that people had stopped believing. I didn't send him a message, didn't call, didn't reach out. What would I even say? That karma was real. That the truth always surfaces. That you can't build a career on other people's failures forever. He already knew. He was living it. Harrison & Cole went public with my role in March. Not as revenge. As recruitment. They were expanding. They needed more system strategists, more technical leaders, people who could build complex solutions properly. And they wanted to use our success as proof they knew how to do it right. Amanda called me into her office. We'd like to announce you as Chief Systems Architect. Put your name on what you built. Use it to attract the kind of talent we need. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want recognition. Because recognition meant exposure. Meant Paul would know. Meant the whole industry would know. People are going to connect the dots, Amanda said, reading my face. They're going to figure out you built Kingston originally. That TechFlow fired you. That you rebuilt it better for us. The story's already circulating in private. We're just making it official. And if that causes problems with TechFlow, yes, she smiled. Let them complain. We have the better system. We have the better results. And now everyone will know we have the better architect. The announcement went live that afternoon. Name. My background. My role in developing Harrison & Cole's data integration platform. My previous experience at TechFlow. The timeline that made everything obvious to anyone paying attention. By evening, my LinkedIn was exploding. Messages from former colleagues. Interview requests from industry publications. Job offers from companies I'd only dreamed of working for before Paul destroyed my reputation. And one message that just said, "You earned this." It was from Vincent, the man who'd thrown me a rope when I was drowning, who'd believed in my work when nobody else would. I stared at those 3 words for a long time. Then I replied, "Thank you for giving me the chance to prove it." The invitations started immediately. Conference speaking requests, panel discussions, industry podcast interviews. Everyone wanted to hear the story. The architect who got fired for a failed project, disappeared for 2 years, then executed that same project successfully for the biggest competitor. It was too good not to tell. Accepted some. Declined others. I wasn't interested in being famous. I was interested in being respected. There's a difference. When I did speak, I kept it professional. I talked about technical challenges, about the importance of proper timelines, about giving experts authority over their expertise, about documentation and testing and all the boring, crucial things that make systems actually work. I never mentioned Paul by name. Never had to. The timeline spoke for itself. The results spoke for themselves. The comparison between Kingston 2.0 struggles and our platform success spoke loudest of all. But people ask, in every Q&A session, every interview, every private conversation afterward, what really happened at TechFlow? Why did Kingston fail the first time? How do you feel about your former boss now? I gave the same answer every time. I learned that good work needs good leadership, that timelines matter, that listening to technical expertise isn't optional. Everything else is history. Professional, diplomatic, true. And it said everything that needed saying without saying anything that could be used against me. I visited my old building once, 8 months after Paul resigned, 16 months after my quiet launch, 2.5 years after he'd fired me. I was there for a meeting with a potential client whose office happened to be in the same complex. Different company, different floor, but the same lobby, the same elevators, the same coffee shop in the corner where I used to buy terrible lattes. I stood in that lobby for a moment, just stood there, remembering. The conference room was on the 14th floor. I could picture it exactly. The glass walls, the leather chairs, Paul's empty smile, security waiting to escort me out. My hands weren't shaking now. My throat wasn't tight. Felt calm, clear, complete. Paul wasn't there anymore. Most of my old team had scattered to other companies. The conference room probably held different meetings now. Different firings. Different moments that felt like the end of the world to whoever was experiencing them. But it wasn't my world anymore. I built a new one. Better one. One where competence mattered more than politics. Where technical expertise was actually valued. Where doing things right was more important than doing them fast. I rode the elevator to my meeting, made my pitch, won the contract, and left without looking back. That building didn't define me anymore. Paul's decision didn't define me anymore. The firing that had felt like death was just a story now. Not even the most interesting part of my career. Just the middle chapter. The part that made everything else make sense. What Paul lost became clear over time. Not just his job. Not just his reputation at TechFlow. But something bigger. He lost credibility. The kind you don't get back. The kind that follows you through an industry where everyone knows everyone. Where reputations are built over years and destroyed in moments. Former colleagues stopped listing him as a reference. His LinkedIn recommendations quietly disappeared. Companies that might have hired him hesitated, made calls, heard stories, moved on to other candidates. He joined a smaller firm eventually. I heard about it through the industry grapevine. Consulting company. Decent but unremarkable. Nothing like his director position. Nothing like the trajectory he'd been on. He'd tried to pivot his narrative. Tried to frame his TechFlow exit as a strategic move. a chance to do something entrepreneurial. But people remembered. The industry has a long memory for public failures, especially when they're compared directly to someone else's success. The thing Paul never understood, the thing that cost him everything, was that you can't build a lasting career on other people's failures. You can't sustain leadership through blame and politics and empty confidence. Eventually, people want results. Eventually, the work has to speak for itself. And when it doesn't, when your projects keep struggling while your former employees' projects thrive, the story tells itself. No revenge needed. No dramatic confrontation. Just time and truth and consequences. What I gained wasn't just professional. Yes, I had the title. Chief Systems Architect at a growing company. Respect in my industry. Financial security. The career trajectory I thought I'd lost forever. But the bigger gain was internal. I learned I could survive the worst professional moment of my life. I learned I could rebuild from nothing. I learned that my value didn't depend on any single person's opinion of me. I learned to trust my own judgment, to push back when something felt wrong, to document everything, to stand firm on technical decisions even when it made people uncomfortable. I learned the difference between confidence and competence, between making promises and delivering results, between looking like a leader and actually being one. And I learned that patience isn't weakness. That rebuilding slowly is sometimes the fastest path forward. That quiet competence beats loud confidence every single time. The firing that felt like the end of my career became the beginning of a better one. Not despite what Paul did, but weirdly because of it. Because it forced me to get better, stronger, clearer about what mattered. I wouldn't thank him for it. But I wouldn't undo it either. Because the person I became after that conference room was someone I actually respected. 2 years after Harrison and Cole announced my role, I got an email from Paul. I stared at the sender name for a long time before opening it, wondering what he could possibly want, what he could possibly say. The message was short. I saw your success with H&C, impressive work. I always knew you were talented. Would be interested in discussing consulting opportunities at my current firm if you're open to it. No apology. No acknowledgement. No mention of Kingston or the firing or the reputation he'd destroyed. Just a casual reach out, as if we were old colleagues catching up. As if he hadn't tried to end my career. As if his current firm wasn't just looking for someone to fix problems he'd probably created. I read it 3 times. Considered a dozen different responses. Angry ones. Professional ones. Detailed explanations of exactly what he'd done and how it had affected me. In the end, I wrote back 5 words. I'm not available. Good luck. Then I deleted his email and blocked his address. Not out of anger. Out of completeness. That chapter was finished. The story was told. The lesson was learned. There was nothing left to say. Nothing left to prove, nothing left to gain from any further interaction. Paul would always be the person who fired me, but I would never again be defined by that moment. And that was the best revenge I could possibly have. The industry conference in November brought everything full circle. 3 years after the firing. 2 years after my quiet launch. 1 year after Harrison and Cole's public announcement. I was the keynote speaker. Standing on a stage in front of 500 people, talking about complex systems, about proper methodology, about the importance of listening to technical expertise, about what happens when you cut corners versus when you do things right. I showed comparison slides, performance metrics, client satisfaction data, the measurable difference between rushed development and proper execution. I never mentioned Paul, never mentioned TechFlow. Never mentioned the firing that had brought me to this moment. But when I showed the timeline, a generic timeline, no names attached, of a project that failed, was refined, and then succeeded dramatically under different leadership, people understood. I could see it in their faces. The recognition. The knowing nods. During Q&A, someone asked the inevitable question. How do you handle setbacks that feel unfair? Pause. Thought about that conference room. About walking out with my cardboard box. About the months of silence and rebuilding. You work, I said finally. You focus on getting better instead of getting even. You document everything and build something real. And you trust that good work, given enough time, creates its own justice. You don't need revenge when you have results. The applause that followed felt different from any recognition I'd received before. Not just professional respect, but understanding. From people who'd faced their own unfair moments. Who'd been blamed for failures that weren't theirs. Who'd wondered if they'd ever recover. I hope my answer helped them. The way Vincent's rope had helped me. Today I run my own consulting firm. Small team. Selective clients. Projects we choose because they're interesting, not because we need them. Harrison and Cole's system still runs smoothly. They promoted someone from within to maintain it. I consult occasionally, but it's theirs now. They earned it. They trusted my approach when nobody else would. Paul is still in the industry somewhere. Still working. Still trying to rebuild what he lost. I don't track him. Don't think about him. He's just a name that occasionally appears in my LinkedIn feed. Easily scrolled past. The Kingston system, both versions, is mostly forgotten now. Replaced by newer technology, newer approaches, newer people solving similar problems in different ways. That's how technology works. Nothing lasts forever. But the lesson lasts. The lesson that competence beats confidence. That patience beats revenge. That doing things right matters more than doing them fast. I didn't win because I waited for Paul to fail. I won because I worked while he was failing. Because I stayed calm when being loud would have destroyed me. Because I built something better instead of tearing something down. And when Paul finally watched his biggest rival succeed with the work he'd claimed I couldn't do. When industry analysts compared our approaches and mine proved superior. When the project he'd fired me over became the foundation of someone else's success. That wasn't revenge. That was just mathematics. Cause and effect. Actions and consequences. The natural result of choices we'd both made. I walked away from all of it. Thriving. Building. Teaching others what those 2 years taught me. And knowing, finally and completely, exactly what I'm worth.